Welcome to the second webinar of EPNoSL VIP, that is the virtual platform of the European Policy Network on School Leadership. My name is Nóra Révai and I'm going to host this session. And for those who are new to our series of programs, just a few words about EPNoSL VIP. This virtual platform is a series of programs, including webinars and forum discussions. You can find the program and all kinds of information on the European Policy Network's portal. I'm going to type you the so in the chat box you can see the link. And you are very welcome at all of our activities. As you can see, today is our second webinar on leading and managing change. Why is it so hard to do? And we will have two speakers today, Peter Earley from the University of London and Grzegorz Mazurkiewicz from Jagiellonian University, Cracow. And before Peter starts the first presentation, I would just like to show you how the platform works for those who are here for the first time. So you can see that there is a chat box here. I'll show you there on your screen. You can type your messages in this line, and this is going to be the way to for the discussion as well. So you can ask your questions by typing it in. There is also a private message function, so if you select from the drop-down menu here, Whisper, then the other drop-down menu is activated and you can select the participant to whom you would like to send a private message to. And there is maybe one more thing to know. Here at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, there is a Give Feedback button, and there you can choose any feedback you would like to give, so you can try it out. There. You can show me if you would need a coffee break immediately. Okay, and if you want to go back to normal, so to remove the little emoticon, then you just press I am fine, and then it takes it off. Okay, and I would also like to draw your attention to the forum discussion that is going to start next week on policy response. And this webinar is also going to be followed by a forum discussion on the platform that I indicated in the link. And now let me introduce you our first speaker. Professor Peter Earley holds the Chair of Educational Leadership and Management at the London Centre for Leadership in Learning at the Institute of Education, University of London. Before joining the Institute in the mid-1990s, he worked as a school teacher in London, a university lecturer in Australia, and on numerous research and evaluation projects at England's National Foundation for Educational Research. Peter's interests are wide-ranging and cover the leadership and governance of schools, leadership development, impact evaluation of professional development, human resource management, and school inspection and evaluation. Peter has published extensively in the field and led many externally funded research projects and consultancies. His latest book, due to be published in autumn, is called Exploring the School Leadership Landscape, Changing Demands, Changing Realities. So Peter, the floor is over to you. I'm going to put your presentation up.
Well, thank you, Nóra, and good morning, everybody. I just managed to be disconnected, so I had to log out and log back in, so apologies for that. Hopefully we'll have a relatively fault-free hour. As Nóra says, for the next hour we're going to be discussing leading and managing change, and try and give a sense of why change is not always the easiest thing to do, and the webinar will lead into our discussion forum, which will pick up and continue a discussion of these and related fields. And I've prepared a paper for discussion, and that will go onto the website later today. I'd like to start off by looking at some comments and observations about change that have been made over the centuries. On the first slide, I've put there 4 views of change, going back from way beyond the BC, with the Greek philosopher Heraclitus saying change is the only constant, to the anonymous statement there saying that the only constant factor is the exponential increase in the rate of change. And I guess if there is one thing we can say with certainty about change, is that there will be more of it tomorrow. And I particularly like the quote there from the seminal publication by Machiavelli, The Prince, who suggests that there is nothing more difficult to do or uncertain in its success than to lead in the introduction of a new order of things. But what do we mean by that new order of things? If I give you a definition, this is one that I've taken from the literature. It's quite a lengthy one, but I think it's very comprehensive and very useful. Morrison talks about change being a process of development and growth that involves a reorganization in response to felt needs. It's a process of transformation, moving from one state to another, and it's initiated either internally or externally, and it involves individuals, groups or institutions, leading to a realignment of existing values, practices and outcomes. Essentially, change is asking us to do something different, something new, something that we haven't done before, the opposite of the status quo, if you like. And as such, change can be quite threatening, because it is taking us outside of our comfort zone and asking us to think about doing something different, something new. But I do think it's quite helpful in leading and managing change for us to have a greater likelihood of being successful in leading that process, a process which all leaders and managers have to do. It's very much part and parcel of leadership. Some people argue that leadership is simply about change and strategy. But I quite like this typology process and also the change outcomes. Then we can look at it in a fairly simple way by thinking of the change process as either being incremental or fairly slow, perhaps leisurely, or think of change, the process, as being rapid, speedy, quick. Similarly with the outcome, you can think of a change which is a major transformation. You know, things have changed hugely. On the one hand, it's transformational change, and again, leadership is very often associated with transformational change. Or the change might simply be a readjustment, a peripheral or minor change, as opposed to a core change that really changes everything about the organization and your work. And if we look at change in terms of those outcomes and processes, then we can think of change as falling into one or other of those 4 types: evolutionary change, adaptation, revolutionary change, and reconstruction. So looking at change in that way, I think, is quite helpful. Similarly, and this is something that I've taken from the business literature, a book by Wilson called A Strategy for Change. And what Wilson did was, again, using that notion of the change being fairly simple, fairly straightforward, as opposed to that change being transformational. And what Wilson has done here is look at change strategies and look at the conditions when they're most useful, the conditions for their use. So, for example, in terms of strategies, he makes a simple dichotomy or division between collaborative processes and coercive processes. And he gives an idea as to when these particular strategies would be most helpful. So, for example, when the organization is out of fit, in other words, it's not meeting its particular objectives very well, and similarly, when there is little time, and thirdly, when the interest groups are in favor of the proposed changes, then you will get those 4 different types of change: participative evolution, charismatic transformation, forced evolution, or dictatorial transformation. So what Wilson and many other writers and theorists around change are saying is that it's not possible to speak of one particular strategy or a single condition for the use of that strategy. In other words, things are going to vary depending on the context, depending on the situation, and depending on the people, most importantly, depending on the people. And it is the people, I think, that we need to give a lot of consideration to, because managing change essentially is about managing people. And again, I quite like this little 2x2, this little typology here that's been developed, looking at people's experience of change on the vertical axis, and people's openness to change, how ready they are to change. And this particular typology talks about these 4 types. Those who are open to change with significant experience are the advocates, the change advocates. Those who are open but have little experience are the willing followers, and similarly the resistance, and perhaps most significantly the blockers. And what we're going to do at the end of my presentation is we're going to come back to this diagram and see where we would position ourselves, because I think it's quite helpful to think about, well, what's our approach to change, either as a change leader or, if you like, someone who is following change. As I said earlier, all change involves people. People are inherently conservative with a small c. Most people prefer things as they are rather than things as they might be different. We prefer the status quo. There are some of us who are change junkies who thrive on change, but most of us are more reticent and resistant to change. And resistance is a natural response. It's a response to feelings of loss, anxiety, and struggle. And part of that is because change for many means more work, more pressure, extra stress. So in a very important sense, we should anticipate change and see it as a natural part of the change process, something to prepare ourselves for. In fact, many people say that change, resistance to change, is a good thing, because it does get us to think carefully through whether what we're doing is actually sensible. Perhaps they've got a point. Perhaps what I'm doing is not quite correct at this point of time, and so on. And when we think about the various reasons for resistance, and there's a list of them there, that's not a comprehensive list by any means, but the main sources of resistance would include those kinds of things. And trust is there right at the top. I think trust, organizational trust, something that's written about quite a lot at the moment, is a very important factor. But also, are we convincing people that the change is necessary, or is it feasible? Are we also aware of the economic threats that might be brought about, and the loss of status and power, and the rewards? What we've got to remember is that change always brings about losers and winners. And what we've got to try and do is to minimize the losses and maximize the gains. And that last one there, I think, is most important, because change does ask us to do something new. It asks us to go outside of our comfort zone, and that indeed can be very anxious. The anxiety of, how am I going to cope? And what we can do, I think, is think about change, think about resistance to change, and say, well, what is it that we can do to try and, well, I put there overcome resistance, but perhaps a better word would be to minimize resistance, because we're always going to get it. And I put there 4 particular strategies. Obviously there are many more, but these are 4 that I just wanted to raise in the time that I had this morning. Ensuring that people are given sufficient information about the change and its desired effect. So you need to convince people that it's something worth signing up for, that it's actually going to make our life better, or in our case the lives of the students better, and we need to ensure that people are given sufficient information about the change and its effect. Involvement in the design and the implementation of the change is very important. You're probably familiar with the term, we need to generate ownership on the part of the people, or what the Americans call buy-in. How can we encourage that ownership or that buy-in? And part of that is getting people more involved in the design of the change and its implementation. Negotiating with staff if they feel they're going to lose out. As I said earlier, there will be winners, there will be losers. Can we try and ensure that the losers lose very little, if anything? We need to sort of look at that very carefully. And lastly, the 4th strategy to overcome resistance that I want to mention is being supportive as a leader and manager of a team, a group of individuals. Are you being sufficiently supportive, listening to any doubts and concerns that people may have, and providing the training as well as the support, the training that is needed in order for people to feel comfortable about what they're doing. So, for example, if we're asking teachers to use new technology in the classroom or to change their pedagogic style or their way of teaching, if we want to introduce interactive whiteboards, for example, which is something that's come into London schools in a big way over the last 5-6 years, then are we ensuring that people have sufficient training so they know how to use that new technology? And what's more, is that training and support ongoing? What we know from research is that so much of the support regarding change and the training tends to be, in the jargon, front-end loaded. It tends to happen at the beginning rather than during and ongoing once people are trying out these new things in the classroom. So I think that's very important. So let me conclude. And a lot of these points are developed further in the paper that I've written for the forum, but just briefly to conclude. Change is complex, it's long-term, and it's non-linear. It's a process rather than a simple one-off event, and therefore it's difficult to manage. Because lasting change involves alterations in our attitudes, our values and beliefs, and hence the culture of the school is very much about change. Fulham, for example, talks about the most important thing about change is reculturing of the organisation, trying to ensure that the organisational culture is one that is amenable to change rather than resistant. But change is destabilizing, it's often threatening, and therefore frequently involves resistance and conflict, which, as I say, can be a good thing. It can get us to think carefully about what we're doing and if what we're doing is the correct way forward. There are lots of ways to approach change management, and the number of variables that affect change management are endless. And for that reason, rational models are inadequate for understanding and managing the change process. But having said that, and having sort of stressed that change is a hard thing to do, and there's no simple blueprint or magic bullet which will ensure success, but there are models, tools and techniques and strategies around that can help us to try and make it, if you like, less difficult than it should be or can be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And so, as Peter said, we will come back to his 4th slide. Was it the 4th? This one?
That one, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to publish a vote. So, with regards to your experience of and openness to change, do you consider yourself as an advocate, a willing follower, a resistant, or a blocker? Okay, I'll just wait 2 more seconds. And I'll stop voting. And publish the results. Here you are. So it seems, Peter, that people who are interested in leading and managing change are more advocates and willing followers. And there are only 2 people who considers themselves as resistant, and we have no blockers.
I have to own up to being one of those resistants. I don't know whether I really am, actually, but I suppose it comes with age. You get more conservative as you get older.
Okay. Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you very much, Peter. And I think people will ask their questions after Grzegorz' presentation, and we can come back to discuss issues. And now I would like to introduce you our second speaker, Grzegorz Mazurkiewicz, who is a sociologist, works at the Institute of Public Affairs in the Faculty of Management and Social Communication at Jagiellonian University in Cracow, Poland. His research interests focus on educational leadership, educational policy, quality of the process of teaching and learning, school evaluation, teachers' attitudes, adults' learning, gender stereotypes in education, and intercultural education. Classes that he teaches are connected to sociology of education, educational administration and leadership, global and European challenges in education, schools evaluation and self-evaluation, and teachers' professional development. Since 2009, he has been the coordinator of various projects supporting struggling schools from disadvantaged regions, and has been focusing on the whole school development, exploring issues of school self-evaluation, authentic teaching and learning processes. His most recent publications include Responsible Management in Education, Facing Contemporary Challenges, How to Avoid Schematical Solutions, and Educational Leadership with Eyes and Hearts Wide Open. So, Grzegorz, the floor is over to you.
Thank you. So I will try to connect my experiences from work with school principals and teachers to theory, but truth speaking, it is more about my practical experiences than theory. When I watch schools in Poland, sometimes I think that change is impossible, but then I also see great examples of change. And always when I see great examples of change, one thing is obvious for me. The main condition for change are people who think and people who feel what is really important for them. I'm not sure if I'm heard because I lost sound. Should I continue?
Yes, we can hear you, Grzegorz.
Okay, thank you very much. I will focus on 3 issues, 3 areas that, in my opinion, are critical for change. And this is complexity of the word, of the educational word, but also the whole surrounding, mental models that we use, and I will explain later what does it mean, and also organizational culture. Those 3 huge areas are closely connected to this, what Peter mentioned, sources of resistance. But I would rather thought about this not about sources of resistance, but as a conditions or areas within we operate. I'm not very sure if the best way to describe the situation of people who face change is to use the word resistance. People are afraid, and people very often doubt in rational motivation, but they very often are willing to do anything when they believe that there is a sense behind it. So that maybe it is not a resistance, but rather kind of a care about this, what is about the situation, about the context, about their environment. Very often I see teachers and school principals so-called resistance as an initiative that serve their students. Very often school principals and teachers don't want to follow official policy priorities in order to save their students. They very often believe that the permanent change is not good for the learning process. But I will come back to this later. So if it is true that school principals and teachers very often stop change in order to protect their students, why to consider change anyway? So I would say that the diagnosis and reflection, the conclusion from observing the contemporary world is quite bitter. We really, although we can notice the development through the ages, I believe that we also raise the bar for us. We have much bigger expectations than in the past. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or even when I was in school didn't have so many ambitious goals as we have today. To teach every student, to include every student, high quality of education, adjustment to labor market, all those goals and aims for education in 80s, what I remember from high school, was not really visible. So we raise the bar, and in the same moment we are really not successful. Somebody asked me how to define spectacular successes. You know, it is of course a little bit ironic, spectacular successes. I'm talking about individual happiness. I'm talking about individual career. I'm talking about social results like equal opportunities, and of course economical and social development. You can list a lot of different issues that might be included in that concept of spectacular success, but the most important is that we pay a lot. We pay a lot to sustain, to keep our educational systems, and they still produce not really successful institutions. So we still, despite numerous efforts of improvement, we still have to admit that we fail. And yeah, so this is a starting point when we talk about necessity for change. We may stay with this what we have. We achieved a lot, but as I said a minute ago, our ambitions are much bigger, are much higher, and accordingly to this, we have a moral obligations towards our students, towards schools, and avoiding change would be also avoiding that moral obligation. Of course, we may think about change as about actions on the different level. I am talking about authentic change that would really change our society's lives. Very often, change is understood as a change in policy or change in legal frame, and especially for people from Eastern Europe, those policy and legal changes are very often quite detached from the reality. And also very often we see change as a change of practical things, the things we do it in school, the things we used to do it in school, and that very often are all only very artificial, very superficial changes that never really bring anything new. Yes, I believe, answering the question, I believe that we need specific leaders. It is important that educational leaders would not follow mainstream of thinkers in, for example, in economy. One of the most terrible trends in education is to think about educational institutions as about business firms. In education, we invest, we don't really gain benefits, we invest for future. So education is, truly speaking, one of those areas where we never can show economical profit. But let's move to that empty slide on which I had 3 issues that I will discuss in next minutes. So one is complexity, second is mental model, and the third one is organizational culture. So I mentioned in the title of my presentation that the answer to the question why the change is so hard is very simple. Yeah, one of those simple answers is it is a really complex word, and this is a really difficult task to change that complex word. And we struggle with a lot of demands and challenges. One is we are not able, or it is very difficult, or we are not able to include multiple perspectives. We were raised and educated in the way that we are usually think in one stream. Of course, this is a history, culture, education, and much more, and it is quite understandable why we have these difficulties. But if the word is so complex, every change should be should include multiple perspectives, and also every change should include those perspectives of teachers and students and schools, and dealing with that diverse word with variety of voices is a nightmare. You know, it is understandable, and we can see it around us. We see frustration of people who deal with other people who have different opinions. We are not trained to really use diversity. We can accept it, but it is very difficult for us to deal it, to help to invite all those different perspectives to the one table and make a use of this. And of course, the question about bottom up and bottom down, this is the next very difficult issue. It is very easy to create new law or new priority or new policy. It is extremely difficult to make those priorities work. Teachers have real power of making sense of those top-down initiatives, and very often it might be ridiculous to observe how they maybe in resisting how they change those priorities to the practice in the classroom. Taking change bottom up is even more difficult, because we don't have resources, we don't have platforms to be heard, but we all know hundreds of initiatives of great teachers and school principals that might or should be transformed into all national effort. Then of course, to stay sane, to stay psychologically stable, we need to understand the game that we take part in. So every leader needs to understand how many elements are around him and or her, and for which element he or she is responsible or not. So one thing is the complexity of the word and our ability to understand it. As leaders, we need to be able to see the whole range of issues around us and understand what we are responsible for. The second thing is that all of us carry different mental models of education, mental models of leadership, mental models of communication, solidarity, all those very important questions for the education, for the school. And in the moment when our interpretation of the word, our interpretation of the environment structures that word and structures that environment, in the time when our knowledge, the borders of our knowledge is border of our word, and the knowledge that we create, so through the interaction, we have to understand that all people gathered around the table might have different approach, might have different beliefs, and they may understand the reality differently, and they may have different value system, and also they may have completely different approach to action and to this what they do in school. So the basic condition for success for leaders is to allow people to talk and talk and talk and talk about this what they believe in. Because without being aware of other people perspectives and mental models and beliefs, we will be in very naive stage of seeing the word as a monolith, as something that is identical to this what we believe. So first task for leaders is to understand the complexity. Second task for the leaders is to help people to understand each other. And the third one, I believe the most difficult, is to deal with the culture of our organization, with the organizational culture. All those individuals' mental models create one huge model, huge platform for of assumptions, very often invisible, but very often very powerful. So all those understandings, values, behaviors, and they decide about this how organization work. And I'm working in the project that is focused on implementation, evaluation into school practice. And after 3 years in Polish schools, I can see how this cultural context really determine the results of that project. So how we may invite people to be open, to have dialogue, to share their doubts and fears, while they really are threatened of that propositions, when they feel that the most important is competition, when the place on in the table, when they try to improve the image of a school, even if it is not based on a real information. So that the culture of organization is really the area in which we have a lot of things to do. And the last slide. Sometimes when I speak to people, they say that I am, one, naive, and second, pessimistic. And I'm saying I'm not pessimistic. I'm just well informed. I know the world in which I work, and I am not naive. I believe that we have no right to resign. We need to work in order to change the school, because I believe that education might change the world. So if we want to change unfair, unethical world, we need to change school. So coming from the perspective of a critical pedagogy, I'm saying that working and looking and researching and dealing with the world that is unfair without intention of the change is deeply unethical, and we have no choice. So for all of those who want to do something, those 3 points are important. See the complexity, try to uncover mental models and understand that there is a powerful mechanism that I called organizational culture that influence everything what we do, and we always need to uncover and deconstruct that culture in order to change it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grzegorz, for your presentation, and Peter as well. And actually, the discussion has already started. The first question was to Peter, and I'll put this up, I think. So Peter, could you outline a particularity for the school aspect? So someone said that you were speaking about change in general and change which would be true for all organizations. Is there anything that is particular for schools?
Yeah, my remarks, although they were about education, did rely on a very general theory about leading and managing change. Specifically for education, if we think about the types of change that we might be working with, it could range from curriculum change, pedagogic change, change in the organization, the school organization. It could concern the organization of learning. I mean, there are lots of different changes within education. I gave the one example of the introduction of technological change with interactive whiteboards. But the general principles that I was trying to outline in my brief presentation really was looking at what do we know about introducing change, and what are some of the things that we should expect, particularly in relation to resistance and how we might overcome or minimize that resistance. But I think that the principles of change management, leading and managing change, are essentially the same regardless of sector. In a way, the uniqueness, well, perhaps unique is too strong a term, but we are working with teachers who are professionals, and involving professionals in the change process really does mean engaging them, empowering them, involving them, and hoping very much that the change will actually come from the teachers themselves rather from, if you like, top down, from the government or the principals. Interestingly, in England at the moment, what we're seeing an increasing amount of, and I don't think it's purely rhetoric, but we're seeing a lot of change coming from the bottom up, from the students themselves. Students are being encouraged to be involved in the school improvement process and helping schools improve teaching and learning.
Thank you. Yes, someone actually asked about bottom-up changes, and you say that it should rather be a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down one. Grzegorz, could you maybe say some examples from your experience?
But if we talk about that question, bottom-up or top-down, I believe that it needs to be organized in the same time. So I don't. So bottom-up changes are critical and are needed because it shows the energy of educators. It shows the necessity. It shows needs and abilities and so on and so on. But they will usually stay only on as a case studies, on a level of case studies and as an example that yes, we can. But then we also need conditions and frames to make others willing to follow those examples, and that usually needs top-down supports, money, the decisions about professional development, and so on and so on. So, detached from reality, top-down initiatives will fail, and the best ideas coming bottom-up without systemic support will fail in that meaning that we will stay only in that particular community, particular setting, but will never go around the world.
I think that's the important thing, isn't it? It's not really where the ideas or the initiatives or the innovations come from, but whether they're actually going to be an improvement. And one of the difficulties is that many changes are not always improvements. Where the ideas come from, sometimes ideas from the top are very good ones. Sometimes ideas from the bottom are very good ones. Good leaders will be looking for a variety of sources of those ideas and essentially trying to convince people that that is something that we should want for our school, for our classroom. And it's getting that ownership of the change that's so important.
Yes, speaking about who to involve in changes, participants say that it's not only the teachers but also the students and parents and other stakeholders that should be involved in these processes.
Yes, of course, but I totally agree with that statement. However, what I see around is that that narrative, using this kind of terminology, is very common and very popular. However, when we go to school, very often you can see that ladder of participation. That parents or students are involved in the way that you may doubt about authenticity of that involvement. They would be used or manipulated or invited only for a certain moment of the meeting, only to decide about certain issues. And so among us, people who are involved, because I believe that all participants of today's discussion are involved in the change and in the discussion about leadership and so on. I believe there is no doubt about this, that all stakeholders should be involved in the decision-making process and about change. But when you go to the real school, you will see how different those groups are. And very often you may see parents reluctant to really take a vote, because they might think about this, that somebody is watching them and they wouldn't like to really change teachers or principal decisions. When we go to school in the evaluation process, we very often see parents who do not say what they think because they believe that in that way they defend school. So there is a lot of different motivations behind different level of involvement. How we may invite people and convince them that they are really welcomed, this is a great question for leaders.
Yes.
I think if I may comment, I agree with what Grzegorz is saying. We need to involve people at all levels, all stakeholders, and sometimes there is more rhetoric than the actual reality. But it does go back to what Grzegorz said in his presentation, particularly about organizational culture, about school culture, and this notion of if the culture is a toxic one or a healthy one. And good leaders are working towards generating cultures that are healthy rather than toxic. So there will be trust, there will be engagement, there will be attempts to involve all stakeholders in the process of change.
I also wanted to say that involving people is very much related to the school culture, and the way they are involved is very much related to the school culture. And someone asked your views on school leaders' role in developing and changing school cultures.
Shall I start on that one, Nóra?
Yeah, go on, Peter.
Well, I think, who was it? I think it was Edgar Schein, the American organizational psychologist, who said that leadership and culture are two sides of the same coin. And although creating culture is the most important things that leaders do, he also said it's the most difficult. And he's right. I mean, in order to bring about change in organizational culture, when it involves those kinds of things that we were talking about, for a healthy organization, trust, understanding, support, good relationships, collaborative work, all of the things that we associate with a healthy culture, a culture that is amenable to change rather than resistant to change. All of those things requires effective leadership, and it requires time. So that even the most effective leader coming into an organization will inherit a culture and will have to work with that culture in order to bring about change. Very few principals have the opportunity to create culture right from the very beginning, from new, if you like. So, for example, a startup school, a brand new school, a principal will start with a new staff and be able to set down expectations and values and beliefs, a sense of moral purpose, will create that culture. But as you know, the vast majority of our principals will inherit a school and an organizational culture, and also they'll inherit a senior leadership team which they'll have to work with. Unlike in business, for example, when a new chief executive is appointed, he or she, and it's mainly he, normally bring in their own people as part of their senior team. So it's crucially important, the role of leadership in creating culture, but it's also the most difficult thing that leaders do.
Grzegorz.
Yeah, I agree with this, that the change will never happen overnight. And this is long and difficult process. It is not work, it is process that we participate in. And through our example, through conversation with people, through support to others, we build that. We don't build a new culture. We slowly change the existing culture. But one of the most important things, what I want to say is, I don't believe that leadership should be considered as individual capacity of individuals. Because that kind of model you can see in business. Yes, we can buy, or in sport, we can buy Jose Mourinho to Chelsea, hoping that he will change that situation in that club. And we are not talking about this. Yes, we are talking about leadership as about process that involves numerous people, that helps to see that distributed leadership. So it is really step by step, built by the whole group, and a person is important, but the more important is how all those conditions around will support the change. And I believe that everybody who wants to play important role in school has to understand the word, be kind of a critical intellectual in watching students, teachers, parents, because we need to understand why people behave like that, or why people behave like that. And usually those reasons are very deep embedded in society. So we need to understand this. We need also to serve those people. We need to support them in the individual, moral, professional development. So it is very, you said it, Peter, there is no one strategy. Yes, it is very difficult. When you are 50 or 60 or 70 and people say that you are a good or bad person, you will never change their opinion during 1 week. You need to work decades on this to deserve to be called good person. So I believe, unfortunately, that organizations are quite similar. We need to work decades to develop that kind of culture that would be positive and supportive and beneficial for us.
Yeah, I would agree, particularly what you're saying, Grzegorz, about distributed leadership. I think healthy organizations are those where leadership is distributed, where it's not seen as being in the hands of a single leader at the top. But I do know, and research I think bears this out, that distributed leadership doesn't just happen. You have to have a leader at the top who wants to have an organization that is characterized by that shared leadership. I did a study last year of new heads in London, and most of them, I think all of them, wanted their organization, their school, to be based on this notion of distributed leadership. But it takes time. They had to find out which people would be able to serve those roles. They had to develop a culture which was trust and understanding, where the relationships were positive, and so on and so forth. So I think the leader at the top of the organization is still a central figure in bringing about that, if you like, that distributed or shared responsibility and leadership.
I think, Peter, that was a beautiful closing idea and sentence. And I would like to thank both of you, Peter and Grzegorz, for your presentation, and the participants for being here. And I think we have raised many questions, and it would be worth talking about them more. So I would like to invite everyone to the forum discussion that is going to follow the webinar. The webinar itself is recorded and is going to be posted on the EPNoSL portal as well. And next week there is going to be another forum discussion starting on policy response. And the next webinar is going to be in September, so you will have to wait some time now and enjoy your summer. But the discussions are going on continuously on the web portal, so anyone is very welcome to join. And I hope to see you later. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.